desensitization, paralyzation, disassociation. How can an initial thought have the capability of encouraging an emotional reaction from my audience and a level of understanding? My morality is being challenged in the position I find myself in. A war, a recession. This fueled an internal battle in my life, which only pertained to more violence. Why is violence an answer? Violence is the emission of laziness and the epitome of moral disregard. Violence should be a final resort. How am I able to write about injustice and repercussions of violence from the place of privilege I find myself in? My guilt paralyzes me. My guilt prohibits my ability to make sense of reality. My exposure and desensitization of violence in my community gives me no help or certainty in my life choices. The pilgrimage for ecstasy, the desire, the dying slave. Sociologically, the term queer has been used to describe an oxymoronic community of difference, which includes the LGBTQIA+ community. The dying slave is the epitome of hunger, satiation, and release, the craving to be validated in a space where the fulfillment is a liability. The hunger I feel as an artist stems from the restriction I face and the desire for representation. The dying slave would later become the epitome for queer writers like Oscar Wilde and Marcel Proust, who looked into the sculpture as a historical ancestor. For them, the sculpture was representative, a secret handshake, a piece of high art that allowed queer people to recognize their own experience of longing and restraint within a museum setting, even when the rest of society refused to acknowledge them. This may have been in a past time, but today the reality is just the same. A widespread conversation regarding the dying slave is the lack of retaliation from this subject. The slave does not struggle against his chains. He seems to almost relax and swoon into them. The greatest secret of the captive is that he's begun to love his own confinement, for it is the only place where his desire is allowed to exist without judgment. Was it Michelangelo's intention to leave the sculpture and the base roughly carved and unfinished? In queer theory, this has been discussed as unresolved identity, a secret, a non-revealed part. The figure emerging from the stone mirrors the queer experience of coming out, the slow, sometimes painful process, carving one's true self out of a cold, rigid environment. The dying slave is almost like a dream state of queer desire, and the rebellious slave is the physical friction of it. The twisting nature of his torso violently breaks free from his bonds, breaks free from the rules. This is interpreted as an internal rebellion against social and religious norms, that demand the suppression or secrecy of one's nature. Contrapposto, the twist of the body, in Italian, emphasizes the buttocks and thighs in a way that it was highly unusual at the time for these sacred tomb commissions. Just like the dying slave, the rebellious slave uses the excuse of captivity to display the male form in a state of high emotional and physical arousal.
Oh, beautiful, aren't they?
But they're all so incredibly sensual.
Because these are more Hellenistic than 5th century Athenian. Most likely sculpted under the influence of Praxiteles. greatest sculptor in antiquity.
This connection is so important to me. Michelangelo's slave sculptures and the Hellenistic bronzes from Call Me By Your Name are found in the concept of coded desire. They both use physical weight of history to anchor emotions that were at the time socially unspeakable. This scene mirrors how queer people have historically used art history as a closet. By talking about the aesthetic of a sculpture like The Dying Slave, you can express desire for the male form without admitting to it personally. The sculpture provides plausible deniability. This scene is such a good representation of indirect intimacy in a place where it is forbidden. Because it's an ancient artifact, it is socially acceptable for these two men to admire its musculature, touch its surface, and discuss its voluptuousness. The bronze arm recovered from the lake represents a fragmented history. When Oliver takes the hand of the bronze statue and shakes it, he isn't just playing with the artifact, he is becoming a displaced gesture. Call Me By Your Name reflects and represents so many queer stories shared all around the world. It's a shared experience, and an experience that is hidden from many. To be queer in the Middle East today is like to be that bronze arm in the lake. You're made of something. You're beautiful and ambiguous, but you're waiting for a moment where you can be recovered and touched without fear. Do you feel like the digitalization of the queer space in the Middle East has made it easier for you to pursue relationships?
I think it does, yeah, especially things with dating apps and social media. But I think that makes it easier across all around the world anyway. But being in the Middle East, there definitely is, obviously, to an extent, a level of secrecy. So being able to, having access to social media is definitely a very useful tool to be able to pursue relationships, dating, and hookup culture.
For many, the element of risk brings thrill. However, the legitimate prospect of exposure and danger of outing can and would be detrimental to one's career. The strongest, most addicting feeling of queer ecstasy is the gratification and the representation. The Dying Slave, Call Me By Your Name, and Being Queer Today is found in the politics of visibility. In many Middle Eastern contexts, the body is a site of extreme secrecy, where survival often depends on the ability to remain fragmented or incomplete to the public eye. For many queer people in the Middle East, identity is lived in fragments. You might not be one person in a private WhatsApp group, another in home, family, and another in the street. Much like the characters in the film, they use the broken bronze to shake hands with a desire. Contemporary Middle Eastern artists use fragments of history to talk about the present. Egyptian artist Mahmoud Khalid also uses the aesthetic of museums and memorials to honor queer lives that have been broken or confiscated by the state. The House of the Unknown Crying Man was made by Mahmoud Khalid in response to the 2001 Queen Boat police raid in Cairo, where 52 gay men were arrested, publicly humiliated, and forced to conceal their weeping faces. This conceptual house museum institutionalizes anonymous male grief as public monument. By externalizing hidden vulnerability, it mirrors the closeted, suppressed sorrow of being queer in the Middle East, where state surveillance, cultural isolation, and the constant threat of violence force individuals to mourn their identities and forbidden loves in absolute secrecy. One question lingers in the back of my mind. Is it better to speak or to die?